Daniel, where are we in our Philippians video series?
Good question, Ryan. I'm really glad you asked. That leads perfectly into our next discussion topic, which is Philippians 1:27 through 2 verse 4.
Nice. Let me look that up.
Hey, before we start, I just want to point out my little happy birthday balloon here that my parents got for me. It was my birthday. Not this past Tuesday, but the one before. I turned 35, which means I am twice as old as most of you.
Yes, you made it. By the way, you guys, if you have Daniel's number, and you should definitely have Daniel's number, you should definitely send him a text message saying, "Happy birthday," even if it's belated.
I'll put it in the text below, because now I know how to do that.
Oh, snap.
35 and still with the times, sort of.
Yes. Still with him. Perfect.
Well, thanks a lot, man. Ryan, would you be willing to read our passage today for us?
Absolutely. All right.
Great. Let's hear it.
Whatever happens, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. Then, whether I come and see you or only hear about you in my absence, I will know that you stand firm in one spirit, contending as one man for the faith of the gospel without being frightened in any way by those who oppose you. This is a sign to them that they will be destroyed, but that you will be saved, and that by God. For it has been granted to you on behalf of Christ not only to believe in him, but also to suffer for him, since you are going through the same struggle you saw I had, and now I hear that I still have. Or rather, it says, and now hear that I still have. So, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any fellowship with the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and purpose. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others.
So this whole passage is really about Christian unity. One of the common kind of arguments against Christianity that I've heard is, if the Christian God is the one true God, then why are there so many churches? Why are there so many different denominations? Ryan, what would you say to that?
I would say to that if the Christian God is the one true God, and since it is very real that we have lots of different churches worshiping him, then either one of two things is happening, or even possibly both. One, either all of these churches have a different and potentially wrong view of God, or what I think is actually happening is that we all worship the same God, who is so great and so creative and so imaginative that there are 1,000,005+ different ways that we can worship him. Now, it makes me a little bit nervous sometimes that Paul says, be one in spirit, but then I think of examples like the Together Church in Golden, where we get together with all the different youth groups, and you know what? We're there to worship Jesus. And honestly, all of my fear about that, just like, dude, our God is so much bigger than that. It's so good.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah, I think that's a great response. It's true, there have been like a lot of church arguments in the past, and some of those are worth having. Like, I think there's some things that are worth arguing about. Like if there was someone who said, Jesus wasn't really God. He was a great human teacher who showed us a great example to live by, but he wasn't God. That's something to argue about because that's an essential matter of truth. Right. Because if Jesus wasn't God, then we have to start editing parts out of the Bible. And if our faith is not based on the Bible, then what is it based on? Is it just human opinion? Well, then you start undermining the whole authority of Scripture. And so there are some things that are worth arguing about, but then there are some things that are worth arguing about, but not worth dividing over, or
Right.
worth discussing, but not worth dividing over. So like one example is women's ordination. There's lots of denominations today that would not ordain a woman to a priest. They would ordain right up to the level right beneath priest, but they would not ordain a woman to the priesthood. I happen to disagree with that, but there are really mature Christ-following believers who would hold that view. And I don't think they're going to hell. I don't think it's worth creating another church over it. I don't think it's worth dividing over, but it is worth talking about, again, from the basis of Scripture and stuff like that. So yeah, but just because someone is in a church where they believe that doesn't mean that they're worshiping a different God as me. Well, and that brings up a good point too, because how I phrased this earlier was that some things are worth arguing about. And what I meant is some things are worth dividing over. But just because we argue about something doesn't mean we have to divide over it. Like this is not a call to some, like, just be nice to each other. Some people, I think, use the verse out of context. Which one is it here? Philippians 2, verse 3. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather value others above yourselves. So this isn't a call to be a doormat and to say, like, I am always going to take every single one of my desires and sacrifice it in order to do what the other person says. Though many of us do not struggle with the doormat approach, and that might be a good spiritual exercise to do for a day. Whenever you have a discussion with someone, you have two different preferences, do what the other person wants to do and just see what that feels like for you.
Mm-hmm.
So that could be a good experience to do. But for those of you who do struggle with the doormat personality, of which I can be one, I struggle on both sides. I just want to say that there is a goodness to the desires that you have, and there is a way to often compromise as well. Like, hey, Ryan, let's play 10 minutes of volleyball and then 10 minutes of spike ball.
Let's just play both.
Not
at the same time. But let's do one full game of both.
Sounds
Yeah.
great.
If I can, I would like to speak to that point that you made about the desires that we have being good. For instance, Paul is in no way saying that we should, lose our voice. And I love that because, like, even here in this text, like, Paul is prescribing them what he wants the Philippians to do, and he's doing it with their best interests at heart. He's saying this will make you strong. This will bring you together. This is what you should do. And he's also he's opening the door for them to all have their voices heard. This unity that he's talking about is to be like-minded, having the same love, being one and in spirit and in purpose. And he kind of, in verse 4, each of you should not only look to your own interests, so, like, keeping in mind, like, this is what we have in mind, but also the interests of others. And that's what Paul is modeling for us in this letter, and opening the door for us to do as we read it, which is cool.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, and you said something in there that was important. It's not about stifling our own voices. And so the unity that he's talking about isn't like, I think this, but Ryan thinks that, so I'm just not going to bring it up. Rather, in the best relationships, you can hash it out, you can argue, and still be in relationship. And I think that's a challenge to community today, because a lot of people in Generation Z, the generation of teenagers right now, they think if you like what I post on Facebook or Instagram, then we're friends. And if you don't like it, then we're not friends. But rather, Christian community and the deepest relationships go beneath that. And you can like different things. You can see things different ways. You can argue about stuff. You can fight, and you can make up. You can still have relationship. And in fact, when Allie and I went through the marriage course, which is put on by Alpha, the same people who do the confirmation curriculum that we use. They said that healthy couples fight once a week. And so I remember one time Allie and I fought on a Monday night, and then we made up and said, it's going to be a great rest of the week because we've had our fight.
That is awesome.
Yeah. And so if you never fight with other people, think about, am I that doormat personality? Not that you should try and instigate fights, but if you never have fights with people, I wonder if it means you're not actually being honest with your heart with other people, which you can't do with everybody. But just something to think about there.
Agreed. Yeah. Actually, many of my best relationships are with people that I have fought with. Now, I'm not a fighter. If any of you are familiar with the Enneagram, I'm not a number 8. I'm a number 7. In case you couldn't tell, which is kind of the fast-moving, enthusiastic person.
The golden retriever.
That's right. That's my Patronus, the golden retriever. But I mean, the people that I have trusted to fight with and move past stuff with, I've actually had deeper relationships with them than the people who I know and we haven't had some sort of debate on our beliefs. And the reason for that is because probably that means we haven't talked about what we believe yet. And that's a pretty easy way to keep a relationship on the shallow end.
Yeah. Yeah. If you never talk about, you're fighting, or sorry, wrong way.
We do know we're fighting often when we're fighting. It's
that
true.
Is so true. That's a saying that I've come to trust. You're fighting when you're fighting.
Yes.
You're talking about something you care about when you're fighting. And so, and that when you're fighting, you actually care about the relationship with the other person, because otherwise you wouldn't fight. You would just say, I don't care what you think. This is what I think. And so the next time you're fighting, I encourage you to take a deep breath, step back, and just ask the question, what is it that we're fighting about that I really care about? And then just to remind yourself, I'm fighting with this other person because I really care about the relationship with them. Because we only fight for things that we really care about, unless we're just being cranky jerks, which especially in quarantine does happen. I had one of those days on Monday.
Yeah. We call that a fight for spite.
Oh, that's good.
Just to spite and kind of like poke at the other person. Like, got a stick and here's a bear. Go get it.
Get it.
Fight for spite.
That's great. So let's talk a little bit about suffering. In chapter 1, verses 29 and 30, Paul says this. For it has been granted to you on behalf of Christ not only to believe in him, but also to suffer for him, since you are going through the same struggle you saw I had, and now hear that I still have. Specifically, what Paul's probably referencing here is imprisonment and persecution by the local political authorities and the Jewish people. And so maybe some of the Philippians were also getting thrown in jail. Maybe they were also being excluded from certain social circles because of their faith. And so, Ryan, do you have a time in your life when you can remember suffering for your faith, whether it was someone making fun of you for being a Christian, or whether it was someone just like not talking to you because they found out you were a Christian, or anything like that?
Oh yeah. Actually, I referenced it in my testimony video, which went up recently. So it's actually from when I was at Awana camp, of all things. So some of you might be familiar with Awana. It's a Christian organization. It's kind of like an after school program. You do verse memorizations, you play great games. It's actually a lot of fun. However, I used to go to Awana camp in Wisconsin, and one of the things there was they had a mission for inner city Chicago kids, which was great. Unfortunately, I was also bumped up a year. So I'm smaller and less tough than a lot of these kids who come from like really rough places and also don't know Jesus and aren't really interested in knowing Jesus. So if you were a Christian, you, I mean, the reality was you got called like not a goody two shoes because people don't use that phrase anymore, but just like wimpy, wussy, weak. Like I got picked on. And that actually is a real part of my testimony, because that was how I was able to discern like who was a Christian and who just said they were, or who wasn't and wasn't interested. Because at that point, like the only place that I could run to other than my family, which is also made up of Christians, was the people who stood up for me, because they were like, dude, yeah, we believe in Jesus. And that's actually not weak. That takes a leap of faith that I don't know if everybody has the capacity for. And that was how I discerned my friends at that camp, and came to know Christ on a deeper level, actually.
That's cool. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, when I was in 8th grade, I had a really profound experience with Christ at a worship night. And after that, I took whiteout and painted like Christian acronyms all over my backpack, which is like the stereotypical cheesy way to be a Christian, right? Like just slap that bumper sticker on, just wear that cross. Yeah.
And that's super 90s.
That's right. Yeah, maybe
white out.
And though I want to say, if you have that on your backpack or you wear a cross, that is not a bad thing.
No.
But in fact, that can be a great way to witness, as long as your life lines up with it.
That's right.
What frustrates me the most is when I see like one of the Christian fish or a cross or something like that on a bumper of a car in front of me, and then they cut me off.
Oh yeah.
It's like, oh, so is that what Jesus is like? So I want to say it's not bad if you have those things. Just make sure your life lines up with it. In fact, it might be a great accountability tool to make sure your life is lining up with what you're advertising. And so anyway, I white out painted my backpack, and I was a little 8th grader. I went to Devlin, represent Devlin. I know the Simpson kids go there. Woo! So I was in 8th grade, and the quarterback of the football team was a junior at that time, and we were both in the orchestra, so we knew each other somewhat. And he just started ripping into me and making fun of me in the hallway and calling me a Jesus freak, and I don't even remember exactly what he said, but he was making a ton of fun of me in front of a bunch of people for my faith. And I'm an 8th grader, and he's a junior, so like, whoa. I was terrified. But I just kind of took it, and I didn't say anything. I mean, what was I going to say? I was smaller than him, everything you mentioned, Ryan. Right. And so I just took it. What was really cool is that the next year, something happened in his life. I don't know what it was. But we were both going to, all-state orchestra, and we had to stay in the same room. So I'm kind of freaked out about this, because here's this senior now. I'm a freshman. Yeah. We're going to stay in the same room. He's made fun of me for my faith. How is this going to go? We're going to spend 2 nights in a hotel room together. And the first night, I remember we're kind of unpacking and hanging out. And he's like, hey, I need to apologize to you. And I said, oh, okay, why? And he said, I made fun of you for your faith last year. And in the past year, God has really done some powerful things in my life. And I just want to say thank you for your witness for Christ. And I'm sorry for making fun of you. That was huge.
Okay, just imagine with me here, like, what if you were the catalyst for that? Like, he was making fun of you, and then he felt bad, and he's like, why do I feel bad? And then what if that was the case?
I never thought of that. That's
like, think about that. Yeah. Like, this little 8th grader, just kind of took it when I gave him crap, and he didn't back off from it. And like, I don't think I would be that brave. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe it was you. And that's why he remembers.
Could be. Yeah, it could be.
The power of the witness, you guys.
That's right. Yeah, it's huge. It's huge. How we live our lives tells other people about God, the God that we worship. And so look at your life, and what kind of God does your life give witness to? Does it give witness to a God who turns the other cheek? Or does it give witness to a God that takes revenge? Does it give witness to a God who puts others' interests and priorities above his own? Or does your life give witness to a God of selfishness? So those are some convicting questions, aren't they?
That's right. I was listening to an interview that the guys on the Bible Project did with one of their friends about taking the Lord's name in vain. And she had this really, really amazing and interesting thought. Because like taking the Lord's name in vain basically to us just means like no cussing, right? Don't use God's name to cuss. Well, what she was saying was that when God picked, the people of Israel, they literally, and in some cases literally, and in some cases just invisible way, they took the name of God upon themselves. And so they were supposed to live like that. And if they didn't uphold that, then that would be taking God's name in vain, acting in ways that God wouldn't have them act. So it goes from the least important rule to the most important rule. And I think that's what we're talking about. And the priest of God, and I think the first one was Aaron, if I'm correct, he had this, it was
it was Father Abraham, Ryan.
Oh my gosh.
Father Abraham.
Oh my
many
gosh.
sons.
No, stop it. I think Aaron had this headpiece, and on it was a golden medallion, and imprinted in the medallion that he would wear at all of his priestly duties was essentially the Hebrew version of people of God. And so that was them taking his name and living it out. And so hypothetically, when the time of revelation comes and the people of God are revealed, it's like the people who are actually believers have this invisible tattoo, almost like a blacklight tattoo. Have you ever gone to Skate City or something, and they give you this little stamp, and it only glows underneath those black lights? Is almost like that. And all of a sudden right now they're invisible because we don't have the right light. But when Lord Jesus comes and it's the time where the people of God are revealed, they've all got that same name of God on them somewhere. And so I think that's a really important thing for us to hold on to, is we're also suffering for him. And since we're going through the same struggles that Christ had, we are taking that name up. And that's what the unity is about, is come together around Christ, bear his name, be the people who have God, which is cool. And I think that speaks to your story, and I think that speaks to my story.
That's cool. That's a great point. Yeah, we take God's name in vain when we call ourselves Christians, or when we become known as Christians and then don't live like Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Is that kind of?
Absolutely. And if I can give you an example, there was a class I took a long time ago where we talked about what it meant to be a Christian, and we had the conversations about theology. And we were having this discussion about Jesus's birth being fully God and fully human, and his mother Mary being a virgin, and anyway, and we kind of got into this debate with one of the other students in my class, because he wasn't a Christian, but he said he was a Christian. And so it eventually got to the point where we had to ask him, well, then what makes you a Christian? And he goes, I go to church on Sunday. Not even all of the Sundays, but I've been to church twice. And it was the strangest and most horrifying realization for me, to realize that not only had he been given this view of Christianity that was so not what Jesus was about, but that he was preaching that to other people often and loudly. And I was like, whoa, man, you cannot say that you belong to Christ because you don't believe what we believe. And he's like, yeah, I believe that Jesus was like an incredibly good guy and moral teacher. And I'm like, that's not what we believe, though. It was very weird.
That's a great point. Hey, Ryan.
Yeah.
Does walking into a garage make me a car?
No, but walking into a bar will make you bruised.
Ah, good one. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, that's what some people call a Sunday Christian, is someone who like goes to church, but then with the rest of their life doesn't really live like Jesus, doesn't really ask the questions of how does my faith influence my friendships, the way I live my life, the way I go about my homework, stuff like that. Yeah, and it's really important. When we talk about this concept of the Lordship of Jesus, which is a theme in the book of Philippians, it's not, I think that it's got two prongs. One is the Lordship of Christ over the whole earth. So acknowledging God's power and Christ's authority over the whole earth, whether that's coronavirus, whether that's the US government, whether it's, whoever, to acknowledge that Jesus is Lord over life and death and the whole world, which is just an awesome thing to think about. That's the God we worship and serve and follow and know. But I think the second prong of it is that if Jesus is Lord and King over the whole earth, what does that mean for my life? Well, it means that Jesus has to also be Lord of my life. And so every time we pray the Lord's Prayer, Jesus taught us to pray, not my will, but yours be done. And so the Christian life is this continual like submitting of my will to God's, and the seeking to live the whole of my life, my finances, my friendships, the way I use my time, the way I look at work and rest, the way I vote, that all of that should be examined through the lens of faith and through the lens of the Lordship of Jesus. So, yeah.
Yeah. And that's super real to the people that Paul is talking to in this passage. Mm-hmm. He says, whatever happens, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. And, he goes on to say, like, you conducting yourselves this way, this is a sign to them of what you believe, and that what they hold on to is not the real reality of the Creator God who was embodied in Christ. And imagine with me, if you will, so it's 4th of July, and we're celebrating Independence Day here in America. And imagine with me, you do not believe that you're an American. You are a Christian. You don't pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. You pledge allegiance to Christ and Him crucified and raised from the dead 3 days later. So on the 4th of July, instead of you going out and watching the fireworks with everybody and having hot dogs and dressing in red, white, and blue and being a part of the parade and getting your face painted and going to a concert and celebrating that, you're just kind of at home, you and your family, doing your own thing. How weird would that be? Well, that was what Paul was calling these people to, because anytime that the Philippians had somebody important coming to town, there was this huge festival just for that person, and there was a parade, and there were like public speeches, and they weren't there, and everybody around them knew who they were, and everybody was expected to show up. Anytime that Caesar, the emperor, came to the city, everybody was supposed to get the city decked out, and they were making the whole place look beautiful and making the parade and throwing a feast, and the Christians weren't there. So imagine that. So if we were to put it into a real context, imagine if you play sports, you didn't go on Sundays, and your team knew who you were, and they were like, we needed you. Where were you? And you said, I belong to Christ, and we we take Sundays to be with other Christians, not to play soccer or tennis or volleyball. And I know how hard that is because my volleyball tournaments were Saturdays and Sundays. So I would play on Saturday and then I would be late every single Sunday. And I could only show up for like the last 2 games. So that was a real thing.
That's a great example, Ryan. Looking back, do you regret that?
No, I don't. Because honestly, it made people ask about it. And they were like, what? Do you just, like, are you just lazy on Sundays? I was like, no, I'm a Christian. I go to church. I see my church friends. We talk about Jesus. And they're like, that's nerdy. And I'm like, yeah, well, here's why. And we talked about it. Like, here's what I believe. I mean, I believe in a creator God who knew me before I was born and brought the entirety of existence into existence with a word. And the word came down and was Jesus. And like, some of that bore fruit immediately. And some of that, I'm still friends with a lot of my teammates. And you know what? They're coming to know Christ step by step.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that story. As we move toward an end here, I want to read chapter 2, verses 1 through 4, and talk a little bit more about unity versus uniformity. So let's dive into that. Philippians 2, verse 1. Therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being of one spirit and of one mind, doing nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others. We've already touched on unity, but I want to talk about unity versus uniformity. And this goes back to our conversation around, like, just because you have an argument with someone, just because you disagree with someone, doesn't mean you can't be in relationship with them. And I think this is really important, especially for teenagers, because your teenage years are a time when you are breaking away from your family and your parents and establishing your unique identity. And so I just want to reinforce that unity does not mean you have to just become like everybody else, whether that's your parents, whether that's your friends. In fact, in you finding your individual, unique, God-created ways of living and being, that includes your talents, that includes your life experience, your story, how you view things, how you view the world. All of those things are unique and special and important things about you. And that is part of who God's made you to be. And so I don't want to pull the rug out from under that and say, no, everyone needs to get in line and think the same thing and see things the same way, because we're Christians and our unity is founded on that. No, our unity is a beautiful, diverse thing. Racial differences are just one example of this. In the end of Revelation, you've got people from every tribe and nation and tongue and ethnicity falling on their knees, worshiping the risen Savior. And that is the kind of unity we're talking about. Unity of purpose, unity of heart, unity of spirit. Not that there's some cookie cutter mold that we're all having to fit into. And so I just think that's a really beautiful thing. And I want to emphasize that unity as a Christian does not mean uniformity. You don't have to be like everyone else, sound like everyone else in the church, see things the same way, do things the same way. Rather, as we talk about these things, we learn from each other and we grow in that common spirit and love and bond with each other. So, Ryan, do you want to say anything about that?
No, that was everything.
Are we preaching yet? Are we preaching?
I think you just keep going, man. You preach.
I just brought it.
You brought it. You brought it heavy.
Thanks, man. So let's close with this question. What are some practical ways that you can love and prefer others in your home, work, or church environment above yourself? And then think especially about whom it is hard for you to love. I imagine this is a very apt question for those in our home right now. So
Yeah.
I just want to encourage you, after watching this video, go through the rest of your day today looking for, and you probably already know some of these things, but keep your ears open for how can I put my sisters, my brothers, maybe a friend who's going through a hard time, how can I put my parents' interests above my own, and just do something practical and tangible to serve and love them. Not expecting a reward, not expecting more money, nothing like that, but simply as a way of loving them, because that's the way of Christ. And I am so excited about what our next video will be in Philippians chapter 2, because it's like the heart of the gospel. And that is our motivation for why we should put others above ourselves. And that's because Jesus put you above himself and put me above himself. So it's going to be great.
Right. Before we go, you guys, we want to let you know about this brand new super fun thing that we're doing that you've probably heard that some of your friends are doing. We are taking youth group online. We're doing it through Zoom. So prep yourselves. There's going to be scavenger hunts. There's going to be Pictionary. There may or may not be Jenga. There might even be a little bit of Mad Gab and board games and small groups and discussions and teachings and lessons. And if you're wondering how we're going to squeeze that all into an hour, well, we're going to try really hard, and it might go to an hour and a half. Love ya, miss ya, and we'll see you next time.
Well, hey, Ryan, thanks for this conversation. And to all of you guys, we hope that you have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you next time.
We love you. We miss you. We'll see you next time.